Pope Francis sent an unprecedented letter to the USCCB, specifically regarding immigration. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. This is what AP thought of that event. Pope rebukes Trump administration over migrant deportations and appears to take direct aim at Vance. Okay, so Pope Francis issued a major rebuke Tuesday to the Trump administration's plans for mass deportations of migrants, warning that the forceful removal of people purely because of their illegal status deprives them of their inherent dignity and, quote, will end badly.
Let's just start right at the top real quick.
Okay.
Usually we're very critical of media and their headlines, but that's actually fairly accurate, actually.
It is really accurate.
Yeah.
Good job, AP.
Okay. I'm going to finish it out. Francis took the remarkable step of addressing the U.S. migrant crackdown in a letter to the U.S. bishops, which appeared to take direct aim at JD Vance, his defense of the deportation program on theological grounds. Okay. Now, Josh, you said it's accurate. I typically never trust these, so I actually wanted to go to the letter itself. And so I went to the letter itself and read it. I have some of it here for you. The three main sections we're talking about are section 4, 5, and 6. If you'd like to go find that, Rosie, you can send a link to the actual letter itself. I will share section 4 here. We can go through it to make sure we're not just talking about what the AP says, what the media says, what was actually written and sent to the USCCB, okay? So section 4, I followed closely the major crisis that is taking place in the United States with the initiation of a program of mass deportations. The rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tacitly or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality. At the same time, okay, Josh, gotta keep going.
Rein it in, Josh. Give him 3 minutes.
At the same time, one must recognize the right of a nation to defend itself and keep communities safe from those who have committed violent or serious crimes in the country or prior to arrival. That said, the act of deporting people who in many cases have left their own land for reasons of extreme poverty, insecurity, exploitation, persecution, or serious deterioration of the environment damages the dignity of many men and women and of entire families and places them in a state of particular vulnerability and defenselessness. 5, this is not a minor issue. An authentic rule of law is verified precisely in the dignified treatment that all people deserve, especially the poorest and most marginalized. The true common good is promoted when society and government, with creativity and strict respect for the rights of all, as I have affirmed on numerous occasions, welcomes, protects, promotes, and integrates the most fragile, unprotected, and the vulnerable. This does not impede on the development of a policy that regulates orderly and legal migration. However, this development cannot come through the privilege of some and the sacrifice of others. What is built on the basis of force and not on the truth about the equal dignity of every human being begins badly and will end badly. So before I get into the section about JD Vance, we're going to take a pause here. Josh, what do you think about this letter?
Well, it's tough. I mean, the most charitable explanation I can offer is that he is being very poorly advised on the situation in the United States. Because the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump came into office not even a month ago, and there were 300,000 immigrant children that had been gone missing. The trek from South America through the Darien Gap in Panama, up through Mexico, is a dangerous trek. The migrants that are going through this pay a ton of money to these wicked, evil coyotes who traffic drugs and women and children. And 68% of the migrants have reported to, this is not just some statistic from the Trump administration. This is Doctors Without Borders. 68% of migrants reported being victims of violence on this dangerous trek, right? Because this magnet of the open border. 1/3 of women were sexually abused, at least.
At least. That's
of
a low.
course, the thing is, a lot of them won't come forward.
Right.
And so you think to yourself, this is a true trail of tears. It is untold human misery. Actually securing the border, which we've done over the last 3 weeks, like the number of illegal crossings is like already like 5% of what it was before.
It's come down
amazing.
93% in just 2 weeks. That's
so again, we get once. I just feel like this is a major failure of this letter, because it's like, well, of course you can deport violent criminals, but not anyone else, and don't try to make it, anyone else who broke your law a criminal. Like, excuse me, wait, what? And again, it's not a circumstance. It's not like we're talking about like a total of like 1,200 people or something like that, like 2,000 people total. In that case, the Pope would be like, you could understand why if the Pope were like, you got 300 million people, you could probably handle 2,000 people. Just suck it up, Buttercup. Like, I could almost understand that. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about not just hundreds of thousands. We're talking about millions of people who have come into this country illegally. So I really have to understand here, like, I try to be a good son of the church. I've read the catechism. Is there something in there that's, because it says countries have a right to a border and to protect themselves and enforce their laws. Is somehow the United States not included in that list? Is there some sort of exemption I don't know about?
Yeah.
Like, I don't understand this. Like, so, I mean, again, why, I'd like to point out Barack Obama himself deported millions of people who came into this country illegally.
During Francis's pontificate.
And when Pope Francis came to the White House, what did Pope Francis speak about? Climate change.
Environment, right.
So, I mean, again, it's just, what is going on here? I mean, it's hard to be charitable. This is just, I don't know.
I think, and for me, like the most, I try to read it the most charitably, like you said, Josh. I'm like, well, he's getting bad information. He has bad actors. Every time I think Francis, we should take him at his word. He likes a mess. He likes disruption. I think he likes this sort of, we want to become this global one nation humanity where we all can like meet each other in this sort of French Revolution notion of fraternity and, all of that. I also, Josh, you mentioned all of the suffering of the migrants who, lured by this promise of the open border, and you can just live in the wealthiest country of the world and never be kicked out. Like that affects the migrants, but also the effect of mass migration. Who does that hurt the most in the country that receives them? It hurts the bottom. It hurts the poor and the marginalized. We've talked so extensively about the creation of this shadow slave economy where people come in illegally, they work for dirt cheap wages, scrubbing our toilets, and the left is like, who will pick my avocados? And that
you think the cost of eggs are expensive now?
No. Yeah, right. You willing to pay more for your blueberries in your smoothie? I'm like, yes, actually, that would be an acceptable trade. But that hurts not only economically, but also culturally, the breakdown of the lower classes in America itself. And that affects Hispanics who are legally here. It affects African Americans, all these minorities that supposedly we're so worried about. It redounds on those families and those communities first, that influx of migration. Well, and again, there is no nuance in this letter addressing that.
Well, and all this talk about respecting the inherent dignity of these migrants, like, why is it? I mean, that's not even in dispute. Like, we're not saying that they don't have dignity. We're just returning them home. It's not like we're calling for them to be executed. I mean, what the hell are you talking about? Like, there is inherent dignity on people, even when they break your laws. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. I mean, what, can we not return them home? I don't understand this. I mean, what about the inherent dignity of people in small towns across America who are overrun by, illegal immigrants? I just don't understand this.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like the whole Black Lives Matter thing. Like, that became such a rallying cry, and all the people in America that didn't like the movement were like, well, so you hate Black people? I was like, no, I think Black lives do matter, but no one's saying that they don't. So we're having like arguments about things. It's such a straw man argument, but it's utilized on behalf of people that wish to see systematic change of not just the government of the United States, but the makeup of the country itself.
The culture.
And I think the word privilege is so telling. Like, there's so many things that I'd like to say here. I mean, one, probably not everyone listening to this is Catholic. I've actually had people who aren't Catholic now start sending this to me. And it's very frustrating for me because this almost feels like some inside the family type activity, like your dad, you have a disagreement with your dad or something like that, and your dad maybe isn't acting the right way, or you're not acting the right way, and you have this kind of laundry that should be taken care of in house, but it of course now is spilled outside of house, and your dad's actions are very public, and now people are asking you, the son, like, hey, what's going on with your dad here? And in some ways, like that's almost like a secondary conversation. Like, no, none of this shakes my belief in Catholicism or the, apostolic succession or Rome. Maybe an opportunity to talk about what ex cathedra is or things like this. But I always encourage people to go back if you have not looked into Argentina in the mid 1900s. I promise, Pope Francis will make so much more sense if you understand where he came from, where he was raised. He grew up in a period of time in a great revolution, mid 1900s Argentina, where communists, Peronists, ended up being the good guys. And so his views on politics more broadly are going to be much more aligned with that kind of mid 1900s Argentinian. And so for someone in the West, you might be like, why does it seem like everything Pope Francis says on politics has kind of a jagged edge towards capitalist Western societies? And it's because...
And especially a seemingly hatred towards the United States.
Right, as a hatred towards the United States. Because in this conversation, he's talking about things built upon force. There's some other countries that were built upon force, namely Russia and China, that you haven't lifted a finger to criticize at all. Largely, you've given over control of the Catholic Church to the CCP. They decide who the bishops are. Now, that's a huge scandal in my mind. There's a current genocide going on of the Uyghur population in China that you have not said anything about. So it's the hypocrisy is so obvious when it's like, it just seems like every other country has the right to defend their borders, decide what people are in their country, what the common good of that nation is, except the United States. It was so telling when he said, oh, you have the right to defend yourself, but people marked as criminal is wrong. And I was like, well, what is violating an immigration policy then? I mean,
what does the rule of law mean if no one's a criminal for violating it, unless you like kill and rape someone?
It's a rhetorical concession that they don't even really mean. Well, technically, you can, but
it's lip service,
really?
Right?
No, the whole thing's lip service, and I guarantee that Jesuit advisors are telling him of their preferred narrative of what's going on in America. I mean, it's honestly appropriate to mention at this point, Pope Francis is really old, and he clearly does not understand America or doesn't have any desire to actually talk to Americans, to work with Americans. Another thing that frustrates me about all of this, and I want to get into the JD Vance part because it's important, there's so many different ways that he could have handled this instead of this kind of passive aggressive, I'm going to send and then publish a press release letter to the USCCB. He could have worked through the apostolic nuncio. He could have met with JD Vance personally. He could have had him come to Rome. He could have come to America. There's diplomatic ways to deal with this in-house if he actually wanted to have like a good faith negotiation, conversation about what America was planning to do in terms of policy. Clearly, this is not the case. I mean, to do this is to intentionally put out into the public this kind of laundry to set up a rhetorical position against the Trump-Vance administration. And rightfully so. I think the Trump-Vance administration feels attacked and like people don't want to work with them in the Catholic Church, clearly. Right. And we're talking about two high-profile Catholics right now, Tom Home and JD Vance, who aren't backing down, who aren't renouncing their faith. They are Catholic. They've been very public about that. And so to see the reaction to Biden basically pushing gender ideology and abortion, not just on Americans, but the world, and then for Pope Francis to say, well, leave that to his conscience. He should talk to his pastor. And then I had some guy on Twitter, Chris Hale, be like, well, he's just calling balls and strikes. I'm like, this is not Pope Francis telling JD Vance, hey, I'll leave this to your conscience. Hey, talk to your pastor.
You should talk to your pastor.
This is a public shaming. And it's not even close to the same. So there's a lot of hypocrisy in that regard. But I want to read this section and then get your thoughts, Josh.
Yeah, this is more than public shaming.
All right, so 6. Christians know very well so I'll start over. Christians know very well what it is only by affirming the infinite dignity of all that our own identity as persons and as communities reaches its maturity. Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. In other words, the human person is not a mere individual, relatively expansive with some philanthropic feelings. The human person is a subject with dignity who, through the constitutive relationship with all, especially with the poorest, can gradually mature in his identity and vocation. The true ordo amoris that must be promoted is that which we discover by meditating constantly on the parable of the Good Samaritan, that is, by meditating on the love that builds a fraternity to all without exception. Erica,
So
I'll start with you.
basically, can I just, for a moment, let's talk Ordo Amoris again.
Yep.
What he's saying here is the Ordo Amoris is not the Ordo Amoris, because the Ordo Amoris literally is that we are incarnate human beings in the flesh. We are not born into humanity at writ large. We are born into a family, a mother and a father to whom we owe specific duties. And then concentrically out into the world through varying degrees, we have a debt of charity to others. That is the consistent church teaching. That is the teaching of the church fathers going back to Augustine. Even before him, you can trace it, like the Bible, for example. But for him to come in and say, no, JD Vance got the Ordo Amoris wrong, which he didn't use his name, as many leftists are pointing out. They're like, he didn't say JD Vance. And you're like, oh, come on. But for him to come in and be like, no, the Ordo Amoris is you should meditate on the Good Samaritan constantly. Like, that's it. I'm like, where is the actual day-to-day policy and governing of the human life and moral, practical, prudential judgments that human beings, being incarnate, being sacramental beings that we are, have to make in order to live our lives day to day, in order for nations to govern and protect their peoples day to day? This is a blowing up. Again, he loves to make a mess. This is a blowing up of the church's long-held teaching and tradition on how it is we work out our holiness in this life. And it's not by loving humanity and, spending all of our energy and our wealth trying to save some unnamed person over in some country 70,000 miles away. It is in the day-to-day. Mother Teresa said, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family. She got the Ordo Amoris. Is there room for foreign aid? Absolutely. The United States, we have incredible wealth and resources, and there is a place for us to act out in the world. But for the Pope to come in and say, that's the only thing for you to do is to open your borders, let everybody in, and be fraternal, that is not respecting human dignity. It is a misunderstanding of what it means to be a human person.
Well, and we're faced with, there's always been times in human history where people have left their homeland to try to find a better life. They're escaping persecution or starvation or whatever the case may be, to try to find a new way of life. The United States has had a rich history of welcoming these people for many years. And I'd like to remind people, every time I get a chance, we have had a perhaps too generous immigration policy since Ted Kennedy put in the Immigration Act in 1965, okay? Well over a million immigrants allowed into this country legally for well over 60 years. And the American citizens in this country are like thinking to themselves, well, we just want them to do it legally. Like we've been cool with that. But like for the last 40 years, that's been flouted. And it's just, we've allowed so many people to come into our country illegally. But something changed over the last 15, 20 years where it's just like driven up like several notches up. What we're seeing now is totally unprecedented. We're seeing a globalist progressive left push mass migration deep into the heart of Europe and into the United States in an effort to completely transform these countries and to break like the West, the Western tradition, the Western market economies. And yeah, I object to that. I object to that strongly. And I suspect Pope Francis doesn't have a problem with that because he still looks at the United States with such disdain. And so I guess I would recall the words of Pope Pius XII. He said, it is quite legitimate for nations to treat their differences as a sacred inheritance and guard them at all costs. Boy, it'd be nice to have a pope that would understand that. And here's when we start talking about this America First thing. Oh, well, you just think America is the best country in the world. I'm like, yeah, I do. But you know what? I'm not so crazy. Like if someone in Canada, like somebody emailed in the show about that, like 51st state thing. Do I want Canada? No, actually, I don't. I want Canada to be very proud of herself and her countrymen. Yeah. And I want the same for, I actually like a France that's proud of itself. Like if France said, you know what, actually, we'll give aid to people in the Middle East and these other countries, but no, we're going to return them home, and we want France to be for French people. I'd be like, that's great. I applaud that. I think that's a good thing. So I just don't understand, like, why would it be the United States that this Pope singles out? And I do believe it's because he's got, in his heart, a little hatred, I think, for the United States. It's pretty ugly, I think.
Yeah, there's a Dostoevsky quote that I think about a lot. Abstract love of humanity is nearly always love of self. And we were talking about this yesterday, our Slack channels were blowing up. But Erica, basically what you described is the liberal white woman ethos of like thinking generally about the Good Samaritan and be like, well, yeah, these people want a better life. That's as long as my toilets get cleaned and, I have a Mexican at my favorite restaurant. I'm not exaggerating. Like it's actually genuinely almost shocking to the conscience that a mainstream argument for mass immigration is who's going to pick your crops, who's going to clean your toilets. I hear it. I see it everywhere.
We need slave labor. Yeah.
We need a slave labor force. Right. So what's frustrating about all of this is the status quo that existed before the Trump administration was broken and evil. Both sides were saying this is true. I'm watching President Trump and JD Vance both go and make actionable changes to the status quo for the better. Finding pedophiles, finding rapists, finding children that have been trafficked into my country, returning people back to their home countries. And genuinely, I would happily have a debate on this, measurably improve the common good of America. And what is the end goal of a country, of a nation, is to promote the common good for its citizens. And America just had an election in which it sent President Trump with a strong mandate, solve this problem. This is a problem that we all think is terrible for moral reasons, for economic reasons, for nation reasons. And this would be such a great opportunity. And this is why I really do think that Josh has a point here for the Catholic Church, especially the USCCB, to be actually aiding, communicating with, engaging with, dialoguing with this new democratically elected presidential administration and people in the pews. And because clearly those people, a majority of these people, sent him into office. I wish there was an opportunity here for our shepherds to understand us, to do what they say that they're trying to do all the time. Walk with us. Learn from our lived experience.
That'd be nice.
And this privilege
synodality,
point,
right? Remember synodality?
It's like
I remember that.
It's almost like it's a one-way street. I mean, here's the thing. Pope Benedict said, states have the right to regulate migration flows and to defend their own frontiers, always guaranteeing the respect due to the dignity of each and every human person. Immigrants, however, moreover, have the duty to integrate into the host country, respecting its laws and its national identity. And so I can't help it. Like Ed Fazer had the perfect, comment on top of this quote. He said, too many churchmen today seem to have this odd opinion that this traditional Christian teaching applies to every nation except for, traditionally Christian countries.
Right.
So in the title, I did promise a Tom Homan response to all of this. It didn't surprise me and it didn't disappoint.
We've heard some very harsh words for the...
I got harsh words for the Pope. Pope wants to fix the Catholic Church. I'm saying this as a lifelong Catholic. I was baptized Catholic. I was First Communion as a Catholic. Confirmation as a Catholic. He ought to fix the Catholic Church and concentrate on his work and leave border enforcement to us. He wants to attack us from securing our border. He's got a wall around the Vatican, does he not? So he's got a wall around to protect his people and himself, but we can't have a wall around the United States. So I wish he'd stick to the Catholic Church and fix that and leave border enforcement to us.
That is so West Carthage, New York. Like anyone who has driven through West Carthage and stopped at the gas station, that is how they talk. That is how they approach their Catholicism.
Yes.
I mean, it is. It
Smell the
so
sheep, baby.
That's American Catholicism right there.
That is a sheep right there. That's a ram, baby.
Oh man. I mean, so Tom Homan, this just, it almost frustrates me because this was so predictable. I knew this was coming and it feels so unnecessary, this whole thing. And rightfully so, people are pointing out the Vatican actually quietly updated their policy on their border.
Yeah.
So in December, the Vatican quietly made a base penalty between 1 to 4 years in jail and a 10K to 25K euro fine for anyone illegally entering the Vatican City state. Penalties increase if an offender uses guns, vehicles, disguises, or is in a group.
You know what?
That's only
JD
for
Vance
violent criminals, though, right? That's not for just anyone.
That's for everyone.
Oh,
JD Vance should recommend that Trump do that as an executive order and make it literally the same, and make the people who come to the country illegally have to pay it in euros.
Copy and paste.
Yeah, why not?
Oh, man.
No, the exact same penalty.
I think
You
that
have
would
to
be
pay
great.
in euros. That's good enough for the Vatican. It's good enough for us. Let's go.
Josh,
That's
run it
next
up the
control.
flagpole. Run it up the flagpole.